podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and welcome to an EPL Index special, South American Stardust. Ladies and gents, the Premier League and South America are intertwined, aren't they? Premier League players have been taking part in the Copa America. Some even got to the final, some successful, some not. They've been involved in off-the-field incidents that we've got to talk about. We've got players linked with the Premier League, and I'm sure you're thinking talk about one related to my club, so we'll try and cover those. And players that will definitely be playing in the Premier League next season, so we'll get an insight into those as ever. And I am pleased, as ever, to be joined by the renowned, the respected Galazzo World Football Index star, South American expert, and basically the guy I tweet when I want to know something about South American football. It's Tom Robinson. Tom, how are we?
Yeah, good, thanks, mate. It's nice to be free from the very, very late nights of watching Copa America football. And as you said there, the rest of league football's coming back around very quickly. So lots to discuss.
A lot went off here in South America, and we'll get to the off-the-field stuff shortly. But just from a pure football point of view, because I did manage to watch some, it's like you said, it's always unfortunate, the element of 1 a.m., 3 a.m. kickoffs due to the nature of where it was in the US as well. What did you make of the actual standard of the Copa America? Because people were naturally comparing it to the Euros, weren't they, at that time? Yeah,
I mean, I think that the level of South American football isn't necessarily always the highest. It's, often compared to a bit of a barroom brawl compared to the maybe more sophisticated European style. Not that we necessarily saw flowing football from every nation in the Euros, but I think it always has that level of tension, that ability to kick off, which obviously it did on and off the pitch. But no, we saw some good football, particularly from Colombia. They were one of the surprises. James Rodriguez rolling back the years, which I don't think anyone saw coming, but he was absolutely brilliant. I think 6 assists. So clearing that. Argentina just looking a very, professional, balanced side that knows each other well and are just head and shoulders above the rest, even if they weren't at their best. And, Uruguay initially showing a lot of attacking intent and verve, but just getting edged out by Colombia there. But I think, some promising signs for Uruguay as well.
Yeah, no two isn't. I always think Argentina in the reviews seem to get a rough deal, Scaloni especially, but he's won the World Cup and he's just won the Copa America. He can't do anything more, literally. That's the input that you want from him.
Yeah, I mean, back-to-back Copa Americas, which is, he's won everything he could, as well as the Finalissima, which, they, even if we see it as a bit of a friendly, they value very highly there. So, 4 trophies in 3 years. And, it's something that's always worth repeating is just how much of a mess things were after the 2018 World Cup. So to go from, a shambles, a side that only just qualified for that tournament and we're all over the place, to be comfortably the best South American side. And again, this is from a guy who, a bit like Southgate, a bit like the Spanish manager, has been, in his first kind of real big job. Maybe wasn't the first choice appointment, but now is going down as one of the most successful managers of Argentinian national team. So they're very happy with everything on the field there.
I could well imagine. And we're talking on the field, but strange. I never thought we'd be doing this. I thought we'd be talking transfers, but with the Copa America, we've got to start with the off-the-field stuff. So what we'll do, ladies and gents, we'll call out specific bits because we know it affects certain clubs in the Premier League. So, Tom, Liverpool fans are going to want to hear and get an insight into this. I mean, the semi-final, the Uruguay-Colombia, and we've got to focus on Darwin Nunez. I mean, there's been various videos, various reviews. People have shared their thoughts on what's happened. Obviously, there's trouble in the stands, in the family area, where the Uruguayan players' families are, it's important to say, surrounded by Colombians, suggested of intoxication, all those types of things. I suppose what we're intrigued to get the South American point of view. What is the South American stance and the Uruguayan sort of thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the Uruguayan stance is they're backing their players to the hilt, as you'd expect. But generally, I think, the thoughts of most people were pretty well articulated by Bielsa in that press conference where he sounded off against Carnival and the organisers. Bad pitches, poor resources allocated for some of the teams, very little marketing of the tournament, and crucially, with this case, really poor security. So what initially, like when you first saw the images, you thought, oh, what's Darwin done here? He's sort of overreacted. Then as the more news comes out, you can understand why he would go and protect his family, as other Uruguayan players did as well. Maybe he took it a bit too far. He is hot-headed, so that's not necessarily a surprise. But I think the issues that we then saw around the final and the amount of people, either getting into the stadium or not getting into the stadium. I know before that, Argentinian players literally had to go out and get their families from inside just to bring them in the stadium. So I think that, the hindsight of it was like, okay, this wasn't just an isolated an incident. This is kind of symptomatic of the tournament, and I think that probably is going to play into Uruguay's favour and Nunez's favour, and maybe takes the heat off a little bit, or albeit you don't want to have to engage in fisticuffs up there in the stands, but we've seen this happen in other places. West Ham, AZ Alkmaar a couple of seasons ago, Eric Dyer going into the stands. So it's not. I think the fact that he was maybe looking to engage a little bit more is that little thing that was probably unnecessary. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, when they see someone protecting their family, are probably gonna have some sympathy for him.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how CONMEBOL view it, and that is what I want to ask about, because probably they were trending for all the wrong reasons, weren't they? After the game as well. I mean, the suggestions were that they were going to investigate, players had been charged, but he's kind of gone silent, which you could probably understand why they want to just let things dampen down, if that's the right phrase. I mean, there's a two-part question to this. What is the latest with CONMEBOL, and are they known as a well-organised organisation? And maybe that's a double element there, or is there a more honest way of putting it, shall we say?
No, I mean, there's no real news from CONMEBOL yet. They're investigating it, as far as I'm aware. Again, I think that the incidents of the final probably will hopefully make them see things with a cooler head and compared to that immediate aftermath.
Yeah.
No idea how long it's going to last. It could take a little while. I mean, my personal opinion, based off just experience of having watched South American football, is that, I mean, I think he'll probably get a fine and a little bit of a ban for national team. I can't see it affecting Liverpool in a negative way. May even work out to be a positive if he's not being used for the national team. But again, that's kind of my opinion. I think, if anything, the thing that I'm more sure about is that Bielsa will definitely get fined by CONMEBOL for his for speaking out against them. We saw previously in 2019, after the Copa America there, Messi criticised CONMEBOL really heavily and was banned for 3 months international football and fined 50k, which wasn't the end of the world really, because I think it gave Argentina, I mean, there weren't really any important fixtures in that time that he was banned, maybe a few friendlies, maybe a qualifier, but it almost worked out quite nicely for Argentina to sort of be forced into trying things without Messi, and gave him a little bit of a break from the pressures of international football. So I mean, I'm predicting, maybe we'll see something similar, like a few month ban from international football, which realistically is probably only going to end by being a few games, maybe the September qualifiers or something like that. We'll see. I mean, trying to predict CONMEBOL is definitely tricky at times.
Yeah, it's funny that, Liverpool fans, it wouldn't be the worst result for you, would it, if Darwin Nunez didn't go to the September games, would it, and rested up? So it will be interesting to see how that one pans out. And then we thought that was going to be the headline to the tournament, Tom, and then even after the tournament's technically finished, Enzo Fernandez, this incident, I mean, this has stolen all the headlines, and quite understandably. So what we've seen is the celebrations on the coach, isn't it? The song they're singing, which relates to French players and their origin. Obviously, if I'm quoting any of the details wrong, please do correct me at the same time as well. Enzo has apologised, but that's after Chelsea players have raised it, unfollowed him. There's been a lot of say from different people in Argentina, I think is the best way of putting it at the same time. I mean, some extreme reactions from different places, and maybe understandably in some cases, some, I'm not sure that is the right phrase, but what is from the South American point of view, what's the Argentinian take on this?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's quite complicated, and so sort of buckle in for a bit of a long, rambly answer here. But I mean, first of all, you can't condone their actions. It's simply not on. It's one thing for fans to sing it, but as for players to do it and film it is just completely brainless and very disappointing from someone who really likes Argentina. So yeah, I've got to choose my words carefully here, because it's not really for someone like me to talk about the impact of racism. That's just not something that I can speak on. But hopefully what I can do is provide some of the context around the reaction. So obviously nothing I'm saying here is justifying it, just to be clear, but just to give a bit more context. So firstly, I think it's worth stating that there are different opinions about it in Argentina. It's not one uniform, homogenous response. So it's, you can't generalize completely, and especially when you've got different motivations behind different responses to it as well. So there's a decent portion of people who are criticizing the players and saying they're in the wrong. But I think probably it's fair to say the majority think they're along the mindset of, well, they've apologised for their error, and what else do you want? Which obviously doesn't quite appreciate the gravity of the situation. So to kind of explain that response and mindset, which obviously I'm not defending, you kind of need to look at the cultural context. So Argentina is a country with a very small black population, and as a result, there is, you see a lot of casual racism, probably more, through ignorance and lack of exposure. There isn't as much of a conversation about race and ethnicity as there are, as in terms of compared to more multicultural nations that have had to deal with that sort of in their population, and therefore, have got more experience with it. So I'd say most of the racism in Argentina tends to fall along kind of class and social lines when it comes to like Bolivians, Paraguayans, Peruvians, that kind of thing. So on top of that kind of general lack of exposure to it, you've got, in my opinion, Argentinians do tend to have a tendency to be quite overly defensive around kind of the subject of racism or any criticism of Argentina generally. It's kind of like that concept of you can insult your own family, but if someone else does, there's a line. So given that the national football team is the symbol of national pride in a time where there really aren't that many institutions you can be proud of over there, people instinctively jump to the defence of them. You come for one of us, you come for all of us against the world type mentality, which I'm sure, Liverpool fans have experienced that in the past, and I can understand that mentality a little bit. So you kind of got these dual factors where, the act is kind of dismissed, wrongly, as just kind of a playful and not that deep kind of song. But you also have the sort of added historical context. I think what's one thing that I'm seeing a lot from a lot of Argentinians is, they kind of see a contradiction and hypocrisy of a colonial power accusing a colonized country of racism. So that adds some fuel to the fire in not just their dismissal of the event, but kind of their becomes a defense of it almost. But that completely misses the point of the joke, in inverted commas, of the song isn't aimed at the white players in the French team. It's those who have roots in former colonial backgrounds. So they can't claim it's some kind of anti-colonial rebuttal, and that's where I think a lot of the Argentinians have a bit of a blind spot with this issue. And then you throw in the partisan nature of football loyalties and the sense that all's fair in love and war when it comes to football chants against your rivals, and it just amplifies that over defensive nature and causes the people to double down even further. And one other point that I think is perhaps overlooked and maybe not understood as much from a European or Western point of view is I think there's a tendency among most people in Europe to kind of consider Argentinians as white because many of them are sort of paler skinned and have some European heritage. And therefore they kind of maybe get judged by the same standards, which aren't really the same lived experience. So it's perhaps, I don't know, a little bit unfair to expect them to be as far along in their discourse and conversation around racism, which is obviously not to excuse it at all. And obviously we all prefer a world without racism. But I think it's at least important just to try and understand those kind of environmental, socio-cultural factors that are at play, even if you don't agree with their response. So yeah, that is kind of what I'd say is the kind of the context around the general population. Yeah. But then you've now got it snowballing into an even bigger issue because you've got the additional political context.
Yeah.
It's a far right government. Think Donald Trump, Bolsonaro, with their current president. And they've really weaponized the issue to score political points, to be all nationalists, to be defenders of free speech and that kind of thing. So that's definitely the more insidious side of it. But I think it's important to separate that from probably what the players and most people think. It's a complicated issue. There's social, cultural, historical, political context all at play. And just important to stress that it's not a uniform response for all Argentinians. Obviously, they're completely in the wrong, and the apologies have been a bit half-hearted, and in my opinion, and ultimately, I think it just boils down to whether you can kind of separate behaviour from character, and that's just a personal choice that each one of us has to make. Really, it's not for me to say what the punishment should be, but I think if it was try to be more constructive rather than punitive, then that's probably going to be more helpful with the people and players' education and development and understanding. But again, not really my position to say what would happen. But hopefully that long, rambly answer maybe brings a bit more of a nuanced, understanding of it compared to, online where we know everyone's sort of paid to be angry and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's really important to get that context and that understanding. I think it's also important for anyone who's listening, as Tom and I both said, he's completely wrong what happened. No one's excusing anything at all. It was to provide a bit of South American understanding. That's what we're trying to give you on this pod from that incident. I suppose the only final thing on this, Tom, is could CONMEBOL take any action on this? Because if it is the Argentinian FA, it sounds like, to use your phrase, they're unfortunately probably going to double down and defend it completely. But is this something that CONMEBOL could look at all?
Yeah, I mean, they should. I just think it's one of those things that it's very hard to sort of for them to police it in a way. Yeah. I mean, I think fines could definitely, be handed out. You definitely do get problems in, Copa Libertadores, Copa Sudamericana, when you're maybe playing against Brazilian teams that have got a bigger black population, or Colombian, even Ecuadorian. I think you do, and you do hear that in the chart, in the crowds, and their response to racism hasn't been good enough. So I don't hold out for much, but maybe the international pressure might hopefully do it. But yeah, I personally can't see much more than a fine. A stadium ban wouldn't be really relevant in this context, because it came from the players rather than not to say that that chant. I think that's chant's been around since the last World Cup was the first time I heard it. So yeah, it's a tricky one, but I don't have a huge amount of faith in CONMEBOL to be certainly leading on that discussion.
Yeah, interesting. That tournament's finished, and there's plenty for them to do and so, as well as America ahead of the World Cup, but that's a different topic for a different day. And let's bring it back to sort of players on the pitch, Tom, because transfers is where people will be looking, and certain players that have been linked, certain players that are going to be playing for their clubs to get those insights as well. So we'll stick on players, but we'll lean into ones who might be things that are definitely happening. A few key names that people be thinking, talk about these for my club, guys. So we'll start with this guy interests me when you start to read about him. I've never heard of Richard Rios. I've never seen him till I see Colombia in the Copa America, and then all of a sudden we hear about his backstory, his almost lack of training, I think it's important to say. And now he's linked with the likes of Everton, even Leicester have been mentioned as possible destinations. So if you're Everton Leicester fan, a good one to pin your ears back for. I mean, Richard Rios, skillful, a character by the sounds of it. Is that a fair assessment of the player?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a really interesting, atypical case, like you said there. You know, he was, Colombian player, sort of box-to-box midfielder, really good long-range shot on him, dribbles well, a very, easy on the eye footballer to watch. But, he was someone who was picked up by Flamengo in Brazil after they saw him playing futsal in Colombia. So he, went straight into their youth team, never played professionally in Colombia, went on loan a couple of times, once to Mexico, and then in the second division in Brazil with Guarani. And then Palmeiras took a punt on him and paid a decent sum as well for someone who'd barely played for Flamengo or top flight football. But he had really strong season. They won the league. And now he's a regular for club and country. And was a really big part of Colombia's 28 game unbeaten run and getting to the final. So yeah, he's there's a lot to like. All action. Really good engine on him. And yeah, he's one of these kind of late bloomers that you don't really see as much in South America, then getting linked to Europe. I mean, you do see it a bit more with Colombians, Uruguayans, where they maybe get their move within South America and then have a couple of years there before going on to Europe. But I think the fact that even though he's been at Flamengo, Palmeiras, two huge clubs, it's not like he dazzled for a few years in Colombia and then came across. So really, really interesting player. I think the type who, would probably do well for a sort of a lower half Premier League club. So, with the hype after the Copa, it seems like a pretty good moment for Palmeiras to cash in on him. And he could do well.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see. Talks of 15 to 20 million price tag as well, which doesn't seem the biggest amount. Like, I think you phrased it well. It seems like a punt player, but could be intriguing for those clubs as well. And United fans are going to want us to ask you about him. I'm sure you've seen all the rumours, the talk. Manuel Ugarte, the Uruguayan midfielder, was a Sporting Lisbon, now currently at PSG. Uruguay obviously got to the semis. They, when played in the third, fourth place playoff, he's been pretty consistent there. It's interesting because I've seen different descriptions of Ugarte in terms of, he's a six, but then there's different types of sixes. We know, were we talking like a ball-winning midfielder? Are we talking a deep-lying playmaker like we talked about Andre before of Fluminense? I mean, how would you describe Ugarte's style? And do you think he could be a good fit for the Premier League in United?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely describe him more of a, your classic defensive midfielder who's in there to break up play, win, protect the back four, win the ball, and just kind of get things moving without having necessarily the most expansive range of passing. I mean, for me, he's someone who I think could come in and slot in at any big club. He's that sort of unfussy player, but with really good positioning, good engine, tidy on the ball. And as much as maybe I'd prefer to see him go to a different club, United are crying out for someone to protect their back line and sort of stop giving away so many chances. So it feels like quite a sensible move for a young player he's still only 23, but has, he was great in Uruguay. I remember seeing him come through and thinking that he was really talented, and he made up the step up first in Portugal with Famalicão, just for one season, and then straight away to Sporting Lisbon, and then on to PSG. So it's been a pretty rapid rise for him. things haven't necessarily gone as well at PSG as he'd want, but I don't think that's necessarily any skin off his nose in terms of nothing he's done wrong. And now you look at that Uruguay centre midfield of, Ugarte as the sitter, Bentancur who can kind of sit or get a bit further forward, and then Valverde who's just, pure energy, kind of Steven Gerrard-esque kind of bombing up and down. And that's a really exciting prospect, that midfield three for Uruguay, which has still got plenty of legs left in it. So, I think Ugarte is a very, very good player. He's not going to be the flashiest name, but I think he would come in and would really fulfill a role, particularly at United.
Yeah, does see it from all the suggestions that terms are agreed. They want it to happen by the sounds of it as well. So it will be interesting to see if he does move to the Premier League. And let's talk about a few South Americans that we know are definitely going to be playing in the Premier League. So probably one here for Villa fans, West Ham, and even Nottingham Forest fans as well, on a brief one. So we'll start with what the Hammers fans want to know. And again, I'm hoping I pronounced this right. Luiz Guilherme now signed for a good fee from Palmeiras, so winger, right wing, left foot. Should Hammers fans be excited by this one?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's someone that we've chatted about before on pods when there was potential of him, being linked with Liverpool. So he's someone who's super talented. Obviously, it's a big jump for a young player without that much experience, but he's got all the attributes to succeed. He's got the skills, the pace, the dynamism, and the physicality as well that I think would be at home in the Premier League. He might not be on the level of Endrick or Esteval when you look at Palmeiras graduates, but he's not far off. So the fact that West Ham have managed to get him, with all respect, is a huge coup, because I was convinced that he would go to a top club in Europe, the team that's already got Champions League football, that kind of level. That's the sort of potential we're talking here. Whether he fits the style of Lopetegui, or whether he's going to get given enough chance, that remains thriving more under Lopetegui than Moyes. So yeah, I mean, if I was a West Ham fan, I'd definitely be very, very excited about this kid, because he's got huge potential.
Wow, could be an interesting one. So good news for Hammers fans then. And Villa fans for this one, and I know you've told me this, and I'm probably going to mess up the name completely. So another Enzo, and I think Barrenachea, I think it's pronounced, come from Juventus. I've got it at the 8th time of asking there. So came from Juventus, part of the Douglas Luiz swap deal with cash linked. It was one of those ones where people looked at it, I think, at first time and went, oh, this is FFP, so it's going to be a dud. But actually, there seems to be, from the South American side, quite a lot of excitement for this kid. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's someone who's been on my radar for a long time, because, he got snapped up from Newell's youth team by Juventus. And that immediately catches your eye when a kid's making that move across before they've even played first team football. And so I kind of stuck a pin in the name, kept an eye on him, and certainly from my followers and stuff like that, I'd always get messages about, oh, how's he doing? Is there any chance of him being in Argentina youth squads? And in all honesty, up to probably about a year individually at least, looked very good. On an individual level, his passing stats were great. Even just comparing across the whole of Serie A. And yeah, it looked like he was finally making a breakthrough, and that the new manager at Juve was looking to include him in his plans. So certainly from that point, I was like, okay, yeah, it looks like, maybe a bit of a late bloomer, but someone who could have a good career in Europe. And definitely, as a Villa fan myself, I was very surprised to see him come across, because, as you said, I don't think he was necessarily someone who Villa would have targeted if it wasn't for the Douglas Luiz deal. But they need defensive midfield cover, especially while Boubacar Kamara is out injured, and he's young, so he could develop and be worth more in the future. He's tall, so that's something that Villa fans, or the squad is lacking, is height and defending set pieces and things like that. So he made his pre-season friendly debut, I think yesterday or the day before against Warsaw, and everyone who watched it said him and Morgan Rogers were the two players that really stood out. I was watching the highlights back today, and he's like, as well as just doing all the kind of tidy things that you expect a sort of deep lying midfielder to do, he's got a really good range of passing. He can really whip it out to the flanks and spray balls around, and does it with kind of intent and purpose, rather than just kind of sideways lateral passes. He seemed to slot in. I mean, there's only so much you can take away from 45 minutes against a lower league team in a friendly, but I think there could be probably a little bit more than we were hoping for at Villa there to work with, and more Argentinians at Villa is never a bad thing in my books.
Yeah, will be interesting to see how he gets on going forward. And the final one, I know that South American players that are now in the Premier League, I don't know if people will have missed it, because it's sort of one of those things, wasn't really a headline amongst the big stories, but we're talking about a big player, and we're talking about a big player, Tom, in 6'8", if I'm reading it right, Carlos Miguel, who is now the goalkeeper at Nottingham Forest. I mean, the height sort of stands out straight away. Is there anything else that stands out about this player at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, because he's not really played much first team football for Corinthians, but I think the most important thing is that height aspect. He's a player who is really going to help Forest defending their set pieces, which a bit like Villa was an issue for them last year. So immediately they're kind of addressing that situation. And obviously Forest have got quite a good recent record in terms of going over to Brazil, and clearly have got contacts there as well. So he's not a player that I've seen a lot of, purely just because he's not played too much for Corinthians, but definitely an interesting one. And Brazilians do a good line in goalkeepers. So I'm not sure he'll be the next Alisson or Edison, but certainly one that you can't help but notice, I think, next season.
Yeah, no doubts about it at all. I think Forest fans, you'll be happy if he's the next Bento, never mind Edison or Alisson. So we'll see how that works out. And ladies and gents, we are there at the conclusions. We've talked about it all. We've talked about off the field. We've talked socio-economic, political. We've talked bans. We've talked excitement of the players who might be coming. We've talked the excitement of the players who will be in the Premier League from South America next season. So all it leaves me to say is, Tom, as ever, for the insight, for the time, for the expertise, it's much appreciated, pal.
No, always a pleasure to be on, and hopefully next time we can stick purely to the football.
Yeah, indeed. That will be nicer, wouldn't it, as things develop in the Premier League, so we'll see. And ladies and gents, from EPL Index, that was another South American Stardust.
Sports Social Podcast Network.